You were in the lands between.
It's me. I'm the Elden Lord.
I'm the Elden Lord.
Hi, and welcome back to Quest Markers. On this show, we talk about video games and the stories they tell with a focus on narrative. My name is Marina. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an artist, video game composer, and your host. Today, we are talking about the 2022 Game Awards Game of the Year, Elden Ring. Spoiler warning, we will be talking about the entire game, so if you haven't played it, please do. It is so worth it. In this episode, we talk about how Elden Ring explores its narrative, symbolism that's scattered throughout the lands between, the space that FromSoft occupies in the industry, and of course, we learn more about our own Tarnished and what builds we played. I am so thrilled for us to start the year with something new. This is going to be our first three-person episode. Today's guests are a couple of my games industry friends. In alphabetical order are Jack Alex Roberts, who was on the show last year on our Pokemon Gold and Silver episode, and Sherveen, who was on our Hollow Knight episode last year. I love chatting games with both of them. I am so happy and so grateful that they're back. So thank you for being here, and let's get into it.
Yay.
Oh, yeah, we're here.
I always feel awkward doing because you heard the intro. I'm going to keep this in. But hello, how are you?
I was too enthusiastic, but I'm excited to talk about Elden Ring.
Yeah, me too. I'm so gassed.
I'm so excited because this was my first Souls game, and we'll get into that. But first of all, how are you?
I'm good. I had some breakfast and I'm ready to chat.
Yep, same here. I've just had my dinner, so I'm ready to chat too.
And it's too early for me to have either of those. So I just have.
But you had some coffee, right? Yeah.
I do. I currently have coffee and water as well. So how are you staying hydrated?
I have some soda. I have some Coca-Cola, and some water on standby. Yes.
And I've just got a big old glass of juice. Just like a pint glass of juice. I'm ready. I'm in for the long haul here.
Jack, it's very funny that you're like juice with dinner and I'm doing soda with breakfast.
We've completely swapped it round. I love it.
This is already so chaotic. I love it so much. The vibes are right. But I would love for you to please introduce yourselves for our listeners, and maybe we can go in alphabetical order, if that's all right. So Jack, starting with you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jack. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a guides writer for GG Recon. So we cover anything video gamey, a lot of esports, and I write the guides for them. I play my little games, and I write the guides, and it's a lot of fun. And I've been there for over half a year now, which feels really strange because I think last time I was on, I was just starting, and or I was around that time where I was just starting, and now we're here like fully into the next year, like as a industry vet. Am I an industry vet yet? Not yet.
Yes.
Yes.
It does not. It doesn't take that long to become an industry vet.
No. I need to give it a year yet, maybe.
No, I love it. Time has really flown because I remember when you first started.
I can't believe how quickly it's gone.
Incredible. Sherveen, if you could please introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Sherveen, everyone. My pronouns are he, they. I'm a project lead on Team Mid-Autumn. We're making a game called Mid-Autumn. And it's a roguelike. It's got like some like supernatural vibes. I tell people it's very like Hades-esque, if folks like Hades. And we're slowly working away on that. And I do a lot of freelance stuff as well. And I play a lot of Elden Ring, as I guess we're all circling back to the topic.
I Love it. I'm going to circle us out of the topic and say that Mid-Autumn looks so beautiful. Sorry, I have to. But before we get into Elden Ring, what are you both currently playing?
So I've been kind of all over the place this year. I've been trying to obviously we're 2 weeks into the year, and I've been trying to focus on one game, and that's just not happened. Like at the minute, I'm trying to finish Final Fantasy VII Remake before Rebirth. And then I'm also dipping into Control at the minute because I loved Alan Wake last year. So I was like, maybe it's time I finally took a look at that. So I'm kind of flipping between those two at the moment.
I'm doing the opposite, basically. I'm working through Alan Wake 2. Doing catch up with everything this year. And I started playing Jusant recently. It's the kind of indie climbing game. And I don't know if anyone's played Chants of Sennar. I played that over the break. I love that. That has been really, really great. If folks like little language lateral thinking puzzle games, kind of.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, I've heard it's really good. One of my friends just finished it. I am playing Bloodborne.
Hell yeah.
Yes, you are.
Hell yeah. Let's go.
It's so good. Sherveen, thank you so much. Sherveen joined my stream because I streamed the very beginning. And thank you so much for all the tips. Because being a Souls game, you don't really get a lot of information. So that was really helpful.
Well, it's so easy to bounce off of Souls games. So yeah. I'm happy to help where I can.
There's always a learning curve, but I am loving Bloodborne. So good. And then I also got to Act 3 of Baldur's Gate 3. So yeah, I feel like I'm terrible at just playing one thing at the same time. And then I have multiple games on my Switch that I'm playing. So yeah, as always, just completely chaotic, but loving Bloodborne. But we're not here to talk about Bloodborne, maybe at some point. We are here to talk about Elden Ring and the incredibly rich world of the Lands Between. And I said this earlier, but this was my very first Souls game, so I'm really, really excited for this conversation. I would love to kick us off with a story summary, if that's all right. And if I get anything wrong, please interject.
It's not possible, right?
No, you've got this.
I hope so. I actually did an extraordinary amount of research for this, and I'll link the sources in the description, including a couple of YouTubers that just you can tell have put an extraordinary amount of effort into summarizing the story. But all right, we're starting the year off really strong with the least clear and least definitive stories. So I ask for everyone's forgiveness before I even begin, but let's go. So all life was once blended together, and before the world was what it is today, the original source of life was the One Great. And the One Great was then fractured by the greater will, and then came individual births and souls. And we learn this from Lightseeker Hieta, who speaks through the three fingers. And this fracturing was considered to be a mistake by the three fingers because fracturing the One Great resulted not only in individual births and souls, but also torment, despair, affliction, sins, and curses. So with good came the bad. It was then that the greater will, perhaps an outer god, sent a star to the Lands Between in an attempt to bring order to this new way of life. And this star carried the Elden Beast, a vassal and living incarnation of the greater will, and also the living incarnation of the concept of order in this new world after the fracturing of the Great One. Or wait, the One Great. I always get that wrong. The One Great. So it's clear that the greater will, although very powerful, needed physical manifestations in this new world to exert its will. Lowercase w on that one. Hence the Elden Beast, which later became the Elden Ring, the Two Fingers, and eventually Queen Marika the Eternal, who would become the vessel of the Elden Ring. Oh, I'm getting goosebumps just remembering my first time in the Lands Between. I love this game. The Elden Ring is the source of the Erd Tree, and its runes represent the various laws of the world, and they define the nature of reality itself. But going back to Marika, who housed the Elden Ring inside of her, she wasn't always a god. She is a Numen, which is a selectable people that you can play as. And at some point, Marika was chosen as an Empyrean. And if you've played Ranni's quest line, you know what this means. An Empyrean is a candidate for godhood. And equally importantly, Empyreans receive a shadow to do their bidding, which are wolves shadowbound to their Empyreans by the two fingers. And the shadowbound are completely loyal to their Empyreans' needs. And Marika's shadow was Malekith. So we know the Elden Ring is made up of runes, and at some point, Marika took the rune of death away from the Elden Ring, giving it to her shadow, Malekith. This locked away the rune of death, or what's also referred to as destined death, which meant two things. Number one, the concept of death in this new world was replaced with souls returning to the Erd Tree. And number two, the fated deaths of the gods and the demigods was removed, granting them essentially a form of immortality. So when the rune of death was removed from the Elden Ring, this is when Order became Marika's Golden Order. And it's at this point that Marika became a god, officially becoming Marika the Eternal for the removal of the rune of death from the Elden Ring. And now, having achieved so much power, Marika had to secure and protect that power, in part by fighting off the giants, because they had, as we know, a flame that could burn the Erd Tree. So Marika needed someone to wage war. So there was to be an Elden Lord and Marika's first husband. This was Hoarah, who became Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. Marika and Godfrey had 3 children, all demigods. Godwyn the Golden, who died during the Night of the Black Knives, and we'll get to that in a bit. Morgott, an omen who defends the Erd Tree from those who look to further violate the Golden Order. Mog, Morgott's twin brother and the Lord of Blood, who is the hierarch of the Mogwyn dynasty. And just a note here that Godric is apparently not Marika's child, but is probably the child of Godwyn. Question mark? Separately, Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon, married Radagon, a champion who rose to a hero's rank during the Liurnian Wars. They had 3 children who eventually became demigods. Ranni, the Lunar Witch Princess, Radahn, a warrior who had mastered gravity magic, and Rykard, who allowed himself to be eaten by an ancient serpent as part of a blasphemous ritual. So Marika and Godfrey divorced after Godfrey completed Marika's bidding, and eventually, separately, Radagon and Rennala divorced. And then Marika and Radagon married, making Marika's stepchildren all demigods. And Marika and Radagon had 2 twin children, Miquella, who had been afflicted with eternal childhood and also kidnapped by Mog, and Melania, who had been afflicted with a supernatural rot from birth. And right before then, Godfrey was divested of his grace and exiled from the Lands Between when Marika had no more use of his strength, which made Godfrey the first Tarnished, the first warrior to lose the blessing of grace, with all of his warriors also becoming tarnished. And this banishment was called the Long March of the Tarnished away from the Lands Between. And our maiden, Melina, eventually tells us, in Marika's words, quote, "After thy death, I will give back what I once claimed, return to the Lands Between, wage war, and brandish the Elden Ring. Grow strong in the face of death, warriors of my lord, Lord Godfrey." End quote. So switching gears, at some point, someone stole a fragment of the Rune of Death, and it was Lunar Princess Ranni. Long story short, she used it to tear her soul from her body, with her soul continuing to live. And she did this to escape her Empyrean fate because she didn't want to be a puppet for the greater will if she was ever chosen to become a god. And that fragment of the Rune of Death was used to kill Godwyn the Golden, which represented the very first death of a demigod. And this event became, as you can imagine, a catalyst, because it's then that the Elden Ring was shattered by Marika, and subsequently came the capital S shattering, which was a massive war. For the crime of the Shattering, Marika became imprisoned in the Erdtree, and at this point, the demigods all claimed great runes from the Elden Ring and waged war. But not a single victor emerged from the Shattering War. And the Greater Will, therefore, gave up on the demigods because no one emerged from this war as a successor to Marika and Radagon. Grace was therefore extended to the Tarnished so that one may become Elden Lord to lead the lands between and bring back order once again. The guidance of grace is also what resurrects us. We're not allowed to die until we fulfill our purpose or have our grace taken away. And most Tarnished have lost the guidance of grace, except for those deemed worthy, who are Horalu, Goldmask, Fia, the Dung Eater, Sir Gideon Ofnir, and us. Which leads us to the beginning of the game. We then set out on an adventure to become the new Elden Lord, depending on the path that we choose for ourselves. And I realized that was an incredibly long introduction. This will be time-stamped. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that we started off there because Elden Ring's narrative design is so interesting, and we'll get to it in a second, but this entire story is told a lot of, in environmental storytelling and finding lore. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. No one said anything, so hopefully this was this was somewhat accurate.
It was very good, Marina. It was very good.
So good.
I love that Elden Ring as a game turns you into Silmarillion people, where you're like, oh, you can't start with the beginning. You have to start
no
thousands of years.
There's a whole history.
No way. Absolutely. But that's what makes it so special. And again, I'm getting ahead of myself. But before we get into things, please give us your Tarnished's name. That's very hard to say. Your build, your favorite weapon or favorite weapons, and your playstyle.
Ooh. Shall I go first?
Go for it, Jack.
Let's go for it. So my Tarnished's name, oh, that is hard to say, was called Flower Boy.
So good.
Because I would go around into people's different games online and I would leave them little flowers whenever they beat a boss or something like that. Sometimes I'd be helpful, sometimes I wouldn't. I'd just leave some flowers and dip. But most of the time I was just outside Millennia's boss room, just leaving flowers and then helping them out with the boss fight or trying to help them out with the boss fight. But
so wholesome.
Trying to be. But it's hard when it's hard to give them flowers when you can't beat the boss yourself. And,
Such a mood.
But the build that I used mostly, it was kind of like a faith and strength build, because I wanted to use the Mickelan Knight sword initially, which is a sword that you get pretty late on in the game at the Halig tree, and its Ash of War is this holy wave that just, when your faith is high enough, it's insane. And then I also really wanted to use Marika's hammer, which is a weapon that you don't get until New Game Plus. But I went, because I'd already completed it with one character, and then when I started doing this build, I asked my friend to we did some, I don't know if it's cheating, I don't know. We swapped weapons so that I could use Marika's hammer from in a fresh playthrough, and then we kind of then I just kind of used that to just go around the lands between with God's hammer and just absolutely something's coming towards me, hammer's coming down, and it's got this power where you fly up into the air and just come crashing back down. It's so good. It's so good. And I thought, this is it's too good to not just have in your first playthrough, in a fresh playthrough. It's so much fun.
That sounds amazing.
I just thought, I've got to go to town with this.
I love that. What was your playstyle? Besides, it sounds very chaotic.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Pure chaos. Pure, if it's running towards me, it's getting whacked, But a lot of the time with this particular character, I'm very much a player that's someone that I'll want to kind of explore every inch of the world. I don't like to kind of just breeze through and potentially miss something, even if it takes me so long to eventually like leave Limgrave. I was like, I need to go to this, I need to do this, I need to make sure that have I spoken to this person in a while? Are they still there? Have they been killed by in like some awful way? And I just thought that's kind of like my playstyle, to kind of really just absolutely get lost. Just absolutely get lost in the world and see where it leads me.
I love that. Sherveen.
Yeah, okay. I'm pretty boring with my Tarnished names. I think I just named them all Sherveen.
I love this.
But
you were in the lands between.
It's me. I'm the Elden Lord.
I'm the Elden Lord.
But in terms of build, my favorite build, I mostly play an int faith build, which is I want to say a pretty weird build. I don't think that's super common. But I usually play int in a lot of Souls games because I like spells, and I use something called the Sword of Night and Flame. You can get it in Caria Manor if you.
Oh, it's so cool.
It's my favorite weapon. It does like 2 spells. One scales with int, one scales with faith, and it requires a ton of investment because int faith is like a horrible build, like not for 90% of everything, but very fun. You get to be basically like a big like spell sword and just like have a sword that like shoots fire at people. And then I'll use like the Prince of Death staff, I think. And then on New Game Plus, I just get another one of those, and then I just double dual wield them. And they do a little bit more damage, I think, if you do it that way. And I think my playstyle, it's weirdly like it's a pretty aggressive playstyle. You kind of have to be. I'm very squishy. Sometimes I'll use some spirit ashes so that I have time to do the attacks, which have like a bit of a wind up. And I'll either use like Latenna, which I have to be very aggressive if I'm using Latenna, because she's kind of like a sniper and will die immediately if you don't draw all the aggro. Or I'll get some skeletons. I forget what they're called, but they have like these big shields, hawk soldiers ashes, I want to say. And they'll just they just stop enemies from getting to you, and they're very tanky. So that's my typical play style. It's a very versatile style because you can switch to faith when you need it. You can switch to int like spells when you need it, and then you also have a sword when you need to use a sword.
I love that. My Tarnished's name was Onion Ring. I am a very serious Souls player. Onion Ring is also the name of my hunter in Bloodborne. My build, I did a dex build because I was incredibly intimidated by magic in general. This is my first Souls game. I had no idea what I was walking into. And I was like, I'm just going to go find the biggest sword that I possibly can. And really early on, I found the Bloodhound's Fang. And I just became a menace. Like,
yeah, bleed and teleport. It's like, it's really great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And eventually I got Eleonora's pole blade as well. And then I was dual wielding for a while. But yeah, like Eleonora's pole blade, I think is one of the highest poise break weapons. So and it's so fast, so it's really satisfying to break poise. But they're both bleed as well. In terms of play style, I like this to me is the ultimate open world game, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But therefore, I just kind of went and was like, going around early game, just trying to understand what is there in the game, like how, because the map kept getting bigger and bigger. I was like, Limgrave isn't the only place we're going to. And so I tried to really push the limits of where I could go. So I was just trying to kind of get a sense of like, how big is the environment? And then I really loved just exploring every nook and cranny once I understood kind of where everything was. But yeah, I would classify my early game play style as panic rolling and my late game play style as rolling into the enemy. But yeah, generally quite chaotic. I lost a lot of runes a lot of the time. And so then I tried to be a little bit more careful. But yeah, I had such a great time early game exploring that I ended up, and I got so many smithing stones that I ended up just being able to like cut through everything for the rest of the game until I got to Melania, and then that was a problem.
I loved watching your streams because like you were like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm doing it right, and I just hopped in the stream and you were just destroying everything. You were just running it.
No, you like lucked into such a like strong build.
It was so powerful. It was like the strongest Tarnished I've ever seen.
Well, it's because I leveled up, and so like the joke became like onion ring is just do 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 do. Like I didn't understand the lore at all, and I was just like do do. Like I'm in the lands between, gonna be Elden Lord. I don't know what anything means. So it was pretty chaotic, but it's because like I went into the Margit fight at level 60, and I beat him in like 5 hits.
Oh my god.
I did. I will say I did also beat him on a different save file at level 25, which took ages. But yeah, I was just able to like cut through everything. It was great. It was lovely until I got to Melania. But we'll get to that, I'm sure. But all right, so I wanted to continue the conversation by talking about Elden Ring's narrative design. And as I said, like this is just peak open world to me, and the story truly is told in the exploration. And it actually rewards you for exploring by giving you chests, you know, with weapons, or even teleportation chests, or a cool boss fight. And I know maybe both of you or people listening will say, well, open world games are supposed to do this. And they are, but I have found that many open world games that I've played don't do this. And I think what's special about Elden Ring is you're given no quest markers. Haha. You're not given a quest log. You have to keep track of all of this yourself. And that just sucked me in, because I was I had a separate note on my phone where I was like, oh, I spoke to this NPC. But you're also rewarded with lore. And this is how I learned about Marika and Radagon. I didn't, in my playthrough, Jack, until you told me, learn that Marika is Radagon. I'm sure we'll get to that. That is so cool.
Big spoiler.
But I learned it. Yeah. Oh, big spoiler. Huge.
We're in spoiler country now.
I mean, I did give a spoiler disclaimer, but like I learned a ton from the Turtle Pope. I love the Turtle Pope. Yes. I love Muriel. But also like, and this is my first FromSoft game, and it was so clear to me the level of craftsmanship and intention that they put behind this. So how do you think Elden Ring did in this regard and its narrative design? I would just love to hear both of your thoughts, especially since you both come from different parts of the industry too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can't wait to hear like your Sherveen, because coming at, from it like from a developmental kind of perspective is so interesting to me. Like it for me, I've played I've been playing Souls games since kind of Dark Souls, and like they've always had a great way of telegraphing it's hard to describe, but how every inch of the environment just tells you a history of the game, you know. There's a bit in the first Dark Souls when you get into Darkroot, a place called Darkroot Basin, that kind of you learn later on that you think this is like a nothing area, and you're looking at all these kind of like the same trees and like the rocks that are kind of like upended, and you think it's kind of nothing, but then later on you realize it's kind of like one of the most important areas in the history of the world. And I think that Elden Ring really kind of carries on that sort of legacy in the, and even more so, you know, now since they've been able to kind of, you know, hone their craft and really nail the concepts that they're really trying to get across. And it's insane to me how they're able to just tell you you can go anywhere you like, and you can learn about the story in any manner that you want, but you're ultimately going to be kind of like writing your own narrative as you do as well. It's so good. It's so good.
No, I as a developer, I'm a huge fan of how Elden Ring solves a lot of like really interesting design problems. And also, Jack, also very big fan of the Darkroot Basin, the Artorias DLC stuff. It's very good.
It's so good.
But I think, and I'll caveat this by like, it's not a perfect game. There's room for criticism with these things, but in terms of like praising what it does really, really well, I think there's a very like masterful understanding of games as spaces and like creating a very memorable setting. Because I think in terms of the size of the map, it's only really like twice the size of Skyrim, right? When you think about it. But I think if you took someone and you like had them play Elden Ring and you just had them like hit a button every time something memorable happened, that like it's the density of memorable things that happen that like months later you're like, that was all these memories of like being in the space. It's really, really designed to have a very rich, dense amount of those things. And I think it really comes into like making you care about a fictional space. And I think all three of us are like examples of like, oh, you go in and Marina, we talk about like how Onion Ring is kind of just shows up and it's like, I don't know what's happening. And I'm walking in. And I think the games are so set up where you really feel like canonically the protagonist of every From Software game is just a dude who shows up and doesn't understand what's going on and just wrecks everyone's shit. But in doing that, by the end, you as a player are like, but I care now about all these things because it kind of like, and I think that goes into like the role of difficulty in these games where, people talk a lot about difficulty with From Software games and Elden Ring, but I think that difficulty is a symptom of really what they're trying to get at, which is they want to create something that's very memorable and that you pay attention to. And one of the like levers that they use for that is creating a dangerous world where you have to pay attention to things like you're looking at ceilings because something might drop down and ambush you. And in doing that, you're noticing like, oh, that's interesting architecture that's got the same symbol as like this other place, and you're like naturally playing it in a way that interacts with the way that they want to tell the story, which I think is very, very cool. And just it's very players don't typically go and like read all the books in like the library and like learn all the backstory and do all those things, but the way that people play Elden Ring is also the way that you learn how the story works, which I think is really elegant. And I'm a big fan of it.
I love what you both said. I would also like to note, I can cut this if you want, but I would like to note that before we hit record, both of you were like, oh, I'm not really good at Souls games. And you're talking about Dark Souls. And I'm over here, like, I just played Elden Ring, which was my first Souls games. So I would like to officially call you both Souls veterans.
Yes.
But yeah,
and you jumped in right at the deep end as well with Elden Ring.
I did, yeah.
It's weird because like even though it's probably like the biggest that they've done, it also feels like the most accessible in a lot of ways. I think because of that.
Interesting.
That's what I found anyway. Purely because I think maybe it's an age thing with Dark Souls, being a little clunkier than you like to remember. Or, how you're seeing how they've kind of taken aspects from each of their games. It's very fast. It's got like the same speed as kind of like Bloodborne. And there's, but it's also got the kind of like the Dark Souls kind of combat sort of side of things. But I think that the reason why it's so accessible is because it does just let you meander about. I mean, like we're saying about Onion Ring, kind of just jump. I can't get over Onion Ring. I love it to bits. And I think the fact that she is able, it's kind of like the character that they're kind of like aiming for you to be, in that you just here to meander around and see what you find. And it doesn't matter if you do it in the right order or the wrong order, you can just find something that is inherently interesting. And I also think that kind of ties in a little bit with how you can kind of like having your kind of like blank slate character, you can create your own sort of like backstory within that world and be able to almost like create your own headcanon for it, really. They've given you the background, they've given you like the seasoning, you just need to like give them the thing to season, really. But it's I've created like 3 characters at this point, and each one has like changed around. I've never stuck with the same idea because you can just change things throughout the game. You're never tied down, and I think that kind of adds to the not only like the growth of your character and becoming Elden Lord, but also let you absolutely freestyle it and see where the game and the world takes you.
Yeah, I think on jumping on what you were saying, Jack, I think a big thing that you're kind of talking about as well is compared to other FromSoft games, I think Elden Ring has the fewest number of like hard bottlenecks of like you have to go this way. Yeah. There's a lot of time where you'll get to a place where it's hard and you can like do a different route. And sometimes if you're doing a very different build, you will run into walls in different places. Like Renala is always very hard for me because I always play like magic builds and it's the worst. Yeah. So if you're playing like a strength build or a dex build, easy boss to deal with. But sometimes I'm like, okay, I'll come back. I'll circle back to Renala when I'm much higher level or something like that. And it just really reminds me of they talked about Lord of the Rings being like a big inspiration for this one. And I think like Elden Ring, I feel like it's it's there. And it just feels very much like if you were going to make a game about like that journey of the Fellowship of the Ring or something, this is how I would imagine. Like, this is like a very definitive way of doing it, where you're given a very simple goal, get to the Erd Tree / Mount Doom or whatever, and then everything that happens is just stuff that happens to you as you try to get there. And there's no real like puzzles or hard obstacles. It's really just problem solving, which feels very organic as you're kind of moving through the lands between.
Absolutely. I think on that note, I did actually think that this was quite I'm cautious of using the word accessible because it is a very difficult game. But in terms of accessibility, like when I couldn't get through, let's say, a difficult boss, I was like, well, I have like 30,000 places to explore, and I would just hop on torrent and just go explore, and you find whatever it might be, smithing stones or anything else that might help you. But also, I got to Lane-Del. I could not for the life of me find the second half of the medallion to take the elevator to Lane-Del. And so I went through that swamp and eventually it takes you through like a mine, and then you're kind of like walking on the side of a mountain to get to Lane-Del. And I was like, oh, did I just bypass everything?
With all the harpies and the magma worm.
It was terrible. It was just awful. I wish I found it. I found it almost immediately afterwards, and I was like, great, cool, GG. God. But but I do think it's so different from Bloodborne. Obviously, I'm making the comparison now because it's top of mind, and that is so linear. And not that that's a bad thing at all. I'm really, really enjoying Bloodborne, but what I loved about Elden Ring is I was like, well, if I'm stuck here, I can just go somewhere else. And through doing those things, you also you really get a sense of like the lands between are still alive. Maybe we're a little bit more alive before we got here. And I feel like there's just so much environmental storytelling. So I'd love to hear from both of you. What are some emotions that you felt as you explored the lands between? Because I felt like the game was like pulling at my heartstrings on some bits, but would love to hear from you.
I think for me, the moment where I thought, oh, this is... I had a couple of moments where I was like, oh, this is great. And then something would happen later on. I'd be like, oh, this is just beautiful. For me, the first kind of moment that really kind of took my breath away was wandering into Caelid by mistake.
Oh no.
Yeah, exactly that. And I thought,
The big crow.
exactly. I'm just like, that sky's pretty red. Like that shouldn't be. When did that happen? And I think for me, from that perspective, I was like, oh my god, this is. If it just immediately turned me on a dime, I was just immediately taken aback that I was in a completely different area. I thought, I'm not supposed to be here yet because the sky's red. Plot twist, the sky doesn't change. It's red forever. It's like walking into hell, but it's so captivating because you think, oh my God, I want to know what's going on here, but also I'm absolutely terrified. But then the other area for me that really, I guess, made me feel kind of like emotional was when you get to Altus Plateau for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I came up I found the medallions. I went up the lift and I'm
so
sorry. And I went up the lift and I think a lot of the time as well, I think it depends on the time. For me, it depended on the time of day that I got in the game. And I got there around like the noon time, so when like the sun was at its peak, and you had all these golden fields. You saw the like the flags made out of lights, and the music softens. It just completely changes. You're aware that you're in this very grandiose area. It feels like for people that have played the first Dark Souls, the minute you get to Anor Londo, it feels like, you're exactly, that this is a very divine, very holy place, very much somewhere that feels like in any other game, it would be the end game area, but it's almost just a continuation of the areas that you visited before. And, you've got end game areas that are just as mind-blowing as well. But like Altus was the first one for me, for sure.
I think in terms of my like big memorable moments, I do think I really enjoyed just like to call it out when you're first in the initial kind of Limgrave area and you see the Erd tree and it's like massive, because that's a very unique I want to say setting for Souls games. I feel like it feels very different compared to the previous settings. I think the things that I think about a lot are, I think maybe like the first time where like you're interacting with Gowry in Stormvale, and he's kind of like Patches-esque and he keeps messing with you. I think that's very fun and memorable. I like a lot of the funny moments. Probably one of my favorite places is Windmill Village. It's so creepy. I don't know if everyone's been to Windmill Village.
Oh yes.
It's just like out of the way, and there's no real like reason for it. It's just like, oh my gosh. Or like the weird Madness Tower that like murders you. That's great.
The Eye of Sauron.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think. I'm also I love the bit where you're kind of what is it? There's like the harpy queen that's singing creepily, and you're in Liurnia the first time. I think that's so great.
Oh my god!
I'm just like, what's happening?
I was looking for an NPC for ages. I was like, where is that coming from? Where? And then it stopped when I killed all these harpies. I was like, have I done something wrong? What have I done here?
Well, it's
horrifying.
Great because the Souls games and Elden Ring in particular does such a great job of training you to see the enemies as like multi-dimensional or nuanced peoples. And I think like when you're first starting, you're seeing like, oh, there's the demi-humans and there's the beastmen and there's these, and you're like, there's a lot of different things. But I would say that every single race or people or faction has like one interesting character or boss or something that like makes you more interested in them as a group of people, which I think is very fascinating. And also the swamps. I'm in love with all of the swamps. They're like, there's a spooky swamp, there's a hell swamp, you thought this was the hell swamp, but this is the hell swamp. They really outdid themselves with poison swamps in this one.
I did not enjoy those. I'm sorry, Sherveen. I did also want to call out, I'm going to mispronounce this. Is it Haligtree, Haligtree, Holy Tree? But getting to there, you're like, wait, hold on. Isn't this, this, why does this look like Lanedell, but like a dead Lanedell?
Yeah.
And there's still soldiers everywhere. Isn't Mikola supposed to be here? Because it's called Mikola's Haligtree, Holy Tree. Where is Melania? That was my real question, is where is Melania? Because I didn't want to progress the game until I found her. But it felt like a dead Lanedell. And then Lanedell kind of dies afterwards. If you decide to, I don't know what happens if you get the Chaos Flame, but yeah, I don't know. It really pulled at my heartstrings, because I was like, all of these people are dedicated to protecting this place that looks like it's dying, and it, like, the light looked blighted, and I loved it. Oh, just loved it. And also, yeah, when I got to the Altus Plateau, I was like, oh, this is so grand and majestic, and so I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. It's so good, so good. But I think maybe digging a little bit deeper, we've spoken about kind of the environmental storytelling, but there are also a fair few narrative themes in the game as well. So I would love to hear from both of you. And I'm reading, Sherveen, maybe we can start with you, because I'm reading your note over here, and I think it's super, super interesting. But yeah, what's one narrative theme that you found the most compelling in the game?
So the comment Marina's talking about is, I wrote that I really love the way that the narrative really plays with identity and like roles and personas, and so the big spoiler with the Marika and Radagon being like the same person essentially, or like two halves of the same avatar, or however you want to conceptualize that. That's one, like, probably the most like obvious example. But the more you kind of think about it, the more this is very clearly a recurring motif. So you have like multiple characters like Irina and Hyetta, or Yura and the guy who turns into name is good. But there's another person that Yura turns into, and there's a lot like Ronnie introduces herself as a different name, introduces herself as Rena when you first meet, and then Godfrey is also Horalu, and there's just this really interesting thing, and I think it even goes into the environmental design, where it's, you have like all of the above ground cities, and then you have the below ground cities that are like directly underneath, and you have like Shifra River, and you have like Deep Root Depths, and that's like directly underneath Lanedell, for example. So there, I feel like the entire setting and all the themes, and also all the characters, all retain this, and there's the Empyreans and their shadows, and I don't know exactly what what to do with all
and one half of the medallion and the other half of the medallion,
the other.
Yeah.
But I think there's a really interesting
I'm still crying.
Like I feel like there's a lot of interesting ideas about duality and like conflict, internal struggle, that you can look at. And I feel like you could come up with a lot of really interesting readings with that. But I find it very fascinating. And that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to with the DLC, is figuring out who else. And I feel like a lot of the theories revolve around like, who is this? And is Mikola and St. Trina, are they the same person? Or who's the Glomide Queen, or things like that. I think it's very fun aspect of the themes.
I love that reading.
No, I can't beat that. Honestly, it's stunning. I think that particularly what you're saying about the DLC, I was about to say like Mikola and St. Trina, it's always kind of been like inferred in like item descriptions, and again in like the architecture you hear different things about Mikola, in that I think From Software has always done, they've always had certain characters that kind of explore the duality of or like the kind of the binary of masculinity and femininity, and kind of like blur the lines a lot with that. And in some ways, I think that the Madagon, the Marika and Radagon kind of like reveal ties into that. There's also kind of like a lot of people find kind of like queer inferences with Rani's questline, and the kind of identity comes into it when you look at Morgott in particular. I find is a really interesting character that doesn't get a lot of focus on, because I think that I think he's such an interesting character in that he is obviously born in as an omen, and that in this world that's something that's completely reviled. And there was a point where I think there's a point where Moog and Morgott are kind of locked away in the Leyndell dungeons, and you realize that Morgott, despite everything, being shunned by everything, and you can even see it on his model where he's kind of like tried to file away his omen horns, is that he is the last man standing. He's remained loyal to the Erd Tree, the kind of like the concept that's tried to completely eradicate his kind of kind, but for some reason he's got this blind loyalty to it. And he's even ashamed, even in like the dialogue of his second phase, where he's kind of ashamed that his curse comes spilling out, and he's ashamed that it's touching the thrones of the other characters, the other demigods. And I think that I just think that's really interesting how with such a little they can tell you such a lot, and they give you just enough to be able to form a consensus, but also there's plenty of room for interpretation as well.
No, I was going to say there's this really great subplot with like one of the nobles in Leyndell who is like Morgott's biggest fan, basically, who then like learns the truth about Morgott and Margit, and then goes like, and now he should die. And you're like, it's really great. They have so many great ways to show you like what the dynamics of power are, and the fact that the noble is immediately like, no, now he should die because he's an omen. Is such a like, it's such a tragic just depiction of how the omens are treated throughout the game.
I can't top any of this, but I will say, excuse me, going back to Ronnie's questline, when I got to the end of it, I was like, oh, I can kind of see what's happening is the game not going to let me marry Ronnie because I'm playing as a woman character. And then it did, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. But the extra point that I wanted to bring up was I like this theme of good inherently comes with bad, with everything. And I think, not to get too philosophical, but like I think that's kind of what started the story. Like that's why the Lands Between, or how the Lands Between got created, was because of the fracturing of the One Great. And instead of life being kind of a singular thing, it became, environments and souls, and it birthed civilizations. But along with that, which I'll interpret it as that being good, and people having wills of their own, and creating many, many lives out of what was once one, inevitably came with bad, with sins, etc. I think maybe I won't get too philosophical, but I feel like with everything good comes something bad. With every happy moment, that there's going to be an end to that happy moment as we continue going through life. And I think maybe that goes back to the duality theme. And I think we see this heaps in the game, where it's like, maybe the sigh of relief once you find safety, but then that you're going to have to go back to the area that you maybe don't want to be in, or the happiness that you feel, or maybe relief that you feel when you manage to defeat a big boss, but then that something worse is probably coming. So I like that idea of the duality of like good inherently comes with bad, but maybe also bad inherently comes with good. And speaking of duality, and identity and multiple identities, I would love to talk about Marika is Radagon. And I didn't do the Gold Mask quest line. I wasn't able to figure it out on my own. And then I was like Googling it. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to spoil myself on something really big. But Jack, I know you were telling me to do it. And then I didn't want to spoil myself on big things. Not that, honestly, I probably couldn't have done that because the story is quite convoluted until you take a step back.
Definitely.
But I love when it eventually, I mean, I watched a playthrough of it, but when you eventually get to Lane Dell and you talk to Goldmask, and I think you have to learn a spell, and you learn the law of regression spell, and then you go to a statue of Marika, and in front of it says regression alone reveals secrets, and then you cast the law of regression spell, and oh my goodness, the moment where the text just goes Radagon is Marika.
Yeah.
And you see this in the opening cutscene too, where like one of the first things that you see in the opening cinematic is Marika breaking the Elden Ring, but then the very next cut is Radagon trying to fix the Elden Ring. And you're just my brain is still completely, my mind is blown by this, and I really, really would love to talk about it, because again, I think it goes back to identity, multiple identities, duality, and it blew my mind, because when I beat Renala and I saw the Radagon statue there, I was like, oh, well, obviously she has a Radagon statue because she married Radagon, and now she's in this place of deep sorrow because he left her. But then knowing that Marika's Radagon, you're my mind is blown and in pieces. So I would love to hear from both of you on this.
No, it's great. And also, I do want to shout out that quest line is basically introduced by Marina, your favorite character, the Turtle Pope.
I love the Turtle Pope so much. Oh my God. I wanted to protect Muriel with my life. Sorry, to go on a very quick tangent. When the first time that I was like, oh my God, I love the Turtle Pope. I'm not learning any spells, but I just want to come back and talk to you. And I saw blood stains everywhere. And so I kept coming back because I was like, I swear to God, if anyone touches the Turtle Pope, it's going to be bad news bears for them. So yeah, Onion Ring's only like true affiliation was to the Turtle Pope, and I would protect the Turtle Pope with my life.
So great.
I would.
But yeah, I don't know what to say about the Marika's Radagon thing, because it is such a like fun moment. And even if you don't go and do that quest line and find the statue, and the statue kind of changes to foreshadow it, you still have the thing of like there's still the transformation in the final boss fight, which I wonder what it's like for people. I wonder if people are like, what? Why am I fighting with Radagon? But I feel like it still works because he's the current Elden Lord, and I feel like you can come to the conclusion you might fight him. But I really love Elden Ring, and FromSoft games do this really great job of foreshadowing characters that you're not going to meet for a really long time. And like, you go and you see the Radagon's pet wolf, and you hear about Marika, and you hear about Radagon, and you meet all their kids, and you kind of can picture what they're going to be like from all these different characters you meet, who are all constantly like interacted with them in some way. And I think it's designed to make you ask a lot of questions, because obviously it's like Radagon is Marika, but what does that mean? And what is the implications of that? And I feel like everyone, I love it as a kind of jumping off point for like thinking more deeply about the game.
Yeah, definitely. And like, it's kind of like, I mean, I went back, and obviously it's shown in the opening cutscene and in the cutscene just before you fight the final boss. But I went back to the very first trailer that revealed Elden Ring, and that announced it, and even it's shown there as well. Every strike of the hammer, and that was when it was like a full CG cutscene to kind of show off this kind of proof of concept. And you don't think of it until your maybe even your second playthrough. You don't even think about it, but every time those cuts between every hammer strike where they're changing, and obviously having this very internal / external struggle between one another, one wanting to keep the status quo and the other one trying to break it. But then, like you say, there's all these questions of were they always like that? You know, was Radagon, was Marika? Wait, it's going to get so hard. Oh my god, were Marika and Radagon the same person when Radagon was married to Renala? Did they eventually merge when he became her consort? You know, what I think, and you know, the implications there that, you know, they have 2 children and both of them are very afflicted. I think with, you know, you've got Mikola that's got eternal youth, you've got Melania that's got the scarlet rot, and it's almost like these 2 kind of incredibly powerful sort of characters this isn't the natural kind of like order of things. And they're grappling with it, and it's kind of then affecting the world around them as well. It's also, I think it's really interesting how it is kind of like the most overt that you'll get when you do the quest, and it just explicitly says that Marika is Radagon. I think that's the most overt that the game gets, really. And it surprised me that it was so kind of blunt that it just said it, because I think you can come to that assumption anyway, and maybe, you know, come back to Muriel and he's got some new dialogue, and obviously when you progress the Gold Masks quest and he's T-posing in front of the air tree by the end of it, which I love. As soon as I got that gesture, I was like, that's it, this is the game of the year. And it kind of it gradually explains it, but again, just enough to leave you with enough speculation of what does this inherently mean for the world, but also talking about the fact that you were saying, like, obviously we meet their kids, slightly off topic, the fact that all of their names are references to George R.R. Martin. Sorry, they just made me think of that.
The G, R, and M.
Yeah.
I
love it.
No, I think it's really great. I think one of the like you were saying, like, I think the mechanics of it are really interesting to think about. Like, okay, can they be in 2 places at the same time? Were they always 2 people, or did that come afterwards? And Jack, you were talking about how Mikola and Melania, you know, kind of, it feels like something unnatural happened with their births. But I think a very interesting thing that this also kind of comes into is it makes you think of things that way, but also a very common theme with Elden Ring, especially, I think, even compared to some of the other FromSoft games, is this idea that what feels natural or normal is often a matter of perspective. Because you could easily look at it and be like, oh, but also, you know, Morgott and Mog are both that wasn't that kind of pairing, but also were born with omen features. And then you look at like all of, you know, is the Scarlet Rot evil or just different? Which I feel it's a little evil, but
just a little bit.
Tiny bit.
It's pretty creepy. But you know, I think with a lot of the kind of factions you meet in the Lands Between, whether it's like the dragons or those who live in death, you are often introduced to them through the lens of the current status quo of like, these are evil, or these are bad, or this is against the natural order. And one thing I really love as you learn kind of more about the world is just like when you're learning more about the Crucible, or how like the Omen and Misbegotten characters used to just be normal, but then it's really just like society that's changed. And I think that's very interesting, because it makes me wonder how Marika and Radagon actually were perceived before the Golden Order, and before really everything was kind of stamped in their image, and what it really was like. I think that's a very fun kind of line of questioning to think about with the narrative as well.
Oh, I love that. I feel like we could talk for hours about this, but if it's all right, I'm going to keep us moving. I have one more question before we go to some community questions, which the show has never done before, so I'm really excited for that. But as a video game composer, I have to ask, because I have a really strong opinion about this. What did you think of Elden Ring's music?
I'm intrigued by Marina being like, I have a very strong opinion.
I know.
I really like I really like the music.
I really like.
Is Marina's opinion going to be that I really like this?
I can kick us off maybe then and give some context on this question, because going into the game, everything that I had read about Elden Ring's music online, I feel like tended to be more on the negative side, and I was like, "There's no way!" Like, I went into, I was like, "There's no way! There's absolutely no way!" And I again, I have a really strong opinion about open world music in that when you're out exploring, especially for like the amount of time that I was going out and exploring, like I took some time off to play the game. And so like when you're just on torrent, just do in the lands between for hours on end. And this was kind of what I was reading online. People are like, oh, there isn't enough music. It's too ambient. But I really don't think that music should be like very melodic and very in your face. Otherwise, your ears get really, really tired. Like if you're out exploring for 3 hours at a time, 4 hours at a time, 5 hours at a time with very little change in music, I don't know. I don't think that would be maybe the best approach. I'm sure that you could somehow make it work. Maybe if you wrote like really long pieces of music, but you would need to write really long pieces of music, I think, for it to work. And I think it also takes away from the gratification of when you get to a boss and then you get this like beautifully grand, majestic, melodic music. And I think that duality, going back to that theme of duality, works so well. When you're exploring, you kind of want the music to be in the background. And if I said Limgrave, both of you know what the Limgrave music sounds like, even though it is super, super ambient.
Yeah.
And I think that it worked so well. And I really just paid attention to it because of what I had read online. Obviously, this is a matter of opinion, but I thought that it worked really, really well, and I love that when I got to a demi boss or even any sort of boss in the game, you would get some sort of like grand, majestic music, and that was like a little treat where it's like, oh, I get to experience beautiful choirs and strings and an entire orchestra now. Telling this boss's story, whatever that might be, through the music. I think Melania is a great example of that. Her music is so sad, even after she becomes the goddess of rot. It's a lot more grand in phase 2 than it is in phase 1, but there's still like so much sorrow and sadness. So the TLDR is, I think the music worked really, really well in Elden Ring. But if either of you have any thoughts or have any favorite tracks, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, Marina, I'll do you one better in that I could not tell you what the Limgrave track goes like, now in this moment, but I know 100% because I have gone and listened to it that the second I listen to it, I am back in Limgrave. Like it's so done. I'm like there, and it's iconic. Like that's the craziest thing to be like. I know it's iconic, even if I couldn't hum a note of it. I can hum the boss tracks. Like I know those. Yeah, but.
I think that's so special, though. So special. I think the music team did a really great job.
And I think it goes into like what you were talking about. I think the through line with a lot of FromSoft things and Elden Ring is they're always looking for like any avenue they can to do some level of storytelling, like wherever they can storytell. And the music, they're thinking about like what keys should we use, what tempo, what instruments, what melodic patterns or motifs are we using, and they're all thinking about what can we tell you about this character or about this place through it. And it's really great. Like a thing I love, this is a bit of a detour, is sometimes FromSoft will even like model parts of the characters that you don't see, like they're behind helmets, because I think like they're always just looking for ways to like add a little bit more storytelling, and they know that some player will eventually like data mine the game and be like, this is what Radagon's face looks like. Not Radagon. This is what Radagon's face looks like or something. And you're like, oh, and it tells you like a little bit more about the character. And I think the music is also like, there's so much to glean from it.
And just kind of carrying on from that with Limgrave, especially, like you say, it kind of sets the tone for that. Like you say, it's going more for atmosphere than anything. But then as soon as, for me, like I said earlier, when I was going into Caelid, it goes from that kind of serene atmosphere, and then you start hearing the dum 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 dum.
Caelid is like genuinely unpleasant to hear.
Yeah.
It's really well done.
It's like nails on a chalkboard, and it just immediately changes you from going on this kind of merry hobbit-like adventure to oh now I'm in Mount Doom and it's been 2 hours, you know, and then as well, I think that particularly with Radagon's theme and kind of like the final boss themes, when you realize that, you know, you've been hearing that every time you launch the game, every time you turn the game on, as soon as you turn it on, you're hearing the final boss theme. And then when you finally get to that moment, I think the moment that you fight Radagon for the first time is so special because of that.
It's so hype. And I also think of this as like, I feel like it's Radagon's theme, but I feel like it's also the player's theme.
Yeah,
and that's I think why it feels so bombastic, because it feels almost like it's cheering you on. It's like, do it, become the Elden Lord.
and it's so contrasting to say something like Gwyn's theme in Dark Souls. You know, you're expecting this that's where you're expecting the big fight, because you've been hearing about this almighty God, you know, Lord of all creation, and etc. And then when you finally get to it, it's the From Software trope now, where it's a sad old man with sad music. You know, you get the piano ding ding ding, and that's it. That's the theme. Yeah, the plink plong, and that's it. And then you contrast that with Radagon, where, like you say, this is for you. You know, this is what it's all been leading up to.
And I really love that, because it's very uncharacteristic for them. And I actually read it as the theme being diegetic to some extent. Like, I almost think that this is like a theme that the Golden Order composed to when they were like, we got to get the Tarnished to fight. So let's come up with like this awesome theme to be like, go to war for us. And if you look in the intro cutscene, one of my favorite things is when they line like, arise now, ye Tarnished. When they say that the first time, they play the theme like a sad version of the theme, and it's it swells. It's very, very fun to see. Like, it just always feels so intentional when you're like looking back at it, like where they're deciding to put in certain motifs or like call back to certain themes or things like that.
It's so good. It's so good. And actually, this is a great segue into community questions, if it's all right to move us into that section. Also, we're gonna go way over time.
Yes,
so I hope that's okay.
I just want to call out, I also love the Godskin Apostles theme, and maybe the Fort of Sax is also great.
Yes.
So good. It's so good. But so going into community questions, we had a question on this. I think we may have already answered it, but I do want to read it. Quote, can the music of a specific place make you hate that zone and wanting to get out of there as soon as you can, or not wanting, I'm laughing too, or not wanting to be there on your second playthrough, end quote. I mean, it's a very simple answer for me. It's Caelid. And Jack, to your point earlier, Caelid's music, so I play violin, and so I was like really listening to what they were doing with the strings. But also I've been trying to figure out, is it an actual like audio file of a fly?
It does sound like a fly. It does sound like a fly.
Yeah.
Or did they manage to do that with an instrument? And I don't know the answer, but for me, it's Caelid, and I think the music just augments the feeling of I don't want to be here even if I'm powerful.
Yeah.
And it's I think so much of it is like the fly sounds for me.
It's almost nauseating, horrible. Isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it matches that kind of like the rotted sort of landscape, and you're like, I could imagine flies here, you know? There probably are flies there.
I mean, like, I think it's very special when a game where I love to listen to the music typically, and I go into Caelid, I will mute it and then unmute it when I'm out. Like, I feel like that's, I feel like very effective music, honestly.
Yeah, definitely.
When I think about it.
Agreed. All right, so we all agreed that it's Caelid. All right, moving on. Quote, what got you into Souls, and what are your expectations for the upcoming DLC? I would love to hear your thoughts, end quote.
I've touched on it a little bit. For me, a friend of mine, my first kind of experience with it was a friend of mine gave me their copy of Dark Souls because they'd absolutely rinsed it. They'd done everything they could, and they didn't want to play it anymore. So he gave me his copy to play before I went off to university, and I loved it. You know, it was something that. It was not the first time, but it was a time that I really remember. Kind of like a lot of my friends had already played it before I got to it, and for me, I had such a good time. Kind of like messaging them, telling them where I'd got up to. You know, I'd just beaten like the gargoyles and stuff like that, and I was like frantically messaging them. And then when, for me, like the one that really kind of like cemented it as like, oh, I love this series. It's Bloodborne. That's just my favorite game of all time, and you know I can't wait for you to finish it because it's such a wonderful game. It's so it takes what they were doing initially with Dark Souls, being quite slow, having to be quite methodical with your armor and things like that, and just completely throws the book out. You're this fast hunter who, you know, you don't have a shield. They're saying you throw away your shield, pick up a gun instead. And from there, it just, when I was an English student, like all these like literary references, you know, Dracula, Frankenstein, werewolves, beasts, everything that kind of like goes on in that game is all ties back to these kind of very literary references. But in terms of, and as well with the DLC, I have no earthly idea. You know, I think we said earlier, I think a lot of it is going to touch on Mikola, and from the one screenshot that I think everybody has kind of analysed to death at this point, it's Nicola. It's Mikola riding on Torrent. So I think that's an inference. I'm hoping that hand in the cocoon just grabs us and like either drags us in or just like yeets us somewhere.
Be great.
It's not a child hand either. It doesn't look like a child's hand.
No, that is an evil old man's hand. What has happened there? You know, what has gone on there?
I love it. I think for me, I remember watching a lot of the like YouTube Let's Plays when the first Dark Souls came out, of people just like dying all the time, and like I just really enjoyed how like funny a lot of the gameplay ended up being. Like there was the big like boulder that just crushes you, and then the asylum demon just like sits on you and murders you. I think I started playing like the Prepare to Die edition maybe like a year or so later, and yeah, like Bloodborne is also probably my favorite. Just great themes, great vibes. I'm very excited for Marina to find out what insight is. And yeah, not spoiling anything else.
I know, I've been so conscious.
I know how you use it, but I don't know what it is.
Oh, it's just, you know, it's great. I feel like I'm always really, really interested in how FromSoft approaches genre, because like Bloodborne is very much like, okay, how do you do a gothic horror? Yeah. And their approach is really cool. And like Elden Ring is very much like, how do you do a classic fantasy? And it's really fun to see their approach. And because it's not what I would think of, and that's always really fun for me. And it feels very much like in a media landscape where things can feel very samey or derivative. It's very fun to see like something that interacts with genre in like a very, very new way. And yeah, so for DLC, again, very excited for Mikola. I think FromSoft has a really, really great track record with DLC overall. So I'm always very excited to see, and they always expand on the setting in a really cool way. I would also be very interested in learning more about Godwin or like some of that stuff. I would love to see like if we can get like a pre-blighted Caelid would be very cool, I think. I don't know. But I have no idea what Caelid's supposed to look like normally.
Yeah.
I'm so
It's not.
curious.
It's just not.
You just walk in, there's tiny crows, tiny dogs, everything's...
They're just normal.
Yeah.
Well, because Celia is there, which is so intriguing to me, as like there's just another like magic school. I have no idea what the vibe of Caelid is supposed to be like.
The only true magic school is the magic school of the Turtle Pope. I just would like for that to be on the record.
Praise be.
Praise be.
All right. Sherveen, did you have anything else to add?
No, I was for some reason I was thinking about the creepy hands in Carrier Manor because I was.
Oh God!
No.
Jesus!
We were talking about magic places, and that's why I went. I literally went. Ugh.
I hated that.
I would laugh.
I hate it. I remember I walked in there. I was like, do, because that was my playthrough. It was just probably do, and then it just fell from the ceiling, and I.
Oh my God!
I'm not even going to go into it. It was terrifying. But what the thing that got me into Souls? So I was really, really interested in Elden Ring for a long time. And like the visuals were just so stunning, and then it won Game of the Year. I was like, man, it's got to be really, really good. And just the Soulsborne, I guess, genre, if you will, was always interesting but intimidating to me. And then my partner was playing Elden Ring, and I was like, oh, can I try? And I loved it. I loved it so much, both the exploration and the combat. And one thing that I didn't expect was that it actually felt fair. I think my greatest point of intimidation was I was like, oh, I don't know how fair the combat in this game is, but at least in Elden Ring, it felt very fair every time that I lost a battle, except maybe the waterfowl dance, but I'm not going to get into that right now. I know supposedly it's dodgeable, but I was never able to dodge it. And then expectations for a DLC. I mean, I second what both of you said. I would love to see more of Mikola's story, and it would be really interesting. This is probably way too much work for a game studio and for a DLC. I don't know. I won't speak on behalf of FromSoft, but it would be so interesting if we could see that DLC or play that DLC in going back to the duality theme in a way where it's like post-Malenia battle and pre-Malenia battle. It would be really interesting for Mikola to wake up and say what happened to my twin. If you did fight and defeat Malenia.
Yeah.
And then also a second branch where if you didn't fight Malenia and Malenia was still alive. But I think it would be equally interesting to kind of go back in time. And that's, I feel like, maybe the more likely thing that we'll see, like a pre us arriving to the lands between, where we can see young Mikola and kind of what that story is there. I think would be super interesting. But all right, moving on. Next question is, quote, what battle did you feel saddest about, happiest about, angriest about, end quote.
Ooh.
That's great.
I know. When I was looking at that, and I was like, it could be Malenia easily for all three.
True.
For me, saddest was Radagon because I mean, that's my favorite boss.
Was it the horse?
Of all time. It was the horse. It was that damn horse.
That horse is so like sad.
Honestly, it was just like he was doing his best, Leonard. His name's Leonard.
I love that horse.
Yeah, in the file names, it's like his name's Leonard. But it's because like it's you go into it, and for me that was. There's a lot of unique kind of like quote unquote gimmicky FromSoft bosses in Dark Souls 3. You've got like Yorm. A lot of the time it kind of happens to be the same thing where you get given a big sword, and it's essentially like the Rykard fight. You get given the big sword that can take huge chunks off of this enemy's health. But Radagon was the first time where you're not doing it to kind of like beat him in the traditional sense. You're doing it to kind of like release him. He's a shell of the god that he once was, and he's just trapped in this kind of like husk of a body now and lost his mind, eating people on the battlefield. But I think the fact that you're doing it with a group of people who each have their own kind of motivations. You know, you're there with Blythe, you're there with Jar King Alexander, you're there with and like a couple of other NPCs that you'll meet along the way. And they've all got their own ambitions, same as you. But I think the fact that you're forced to kind of club together to take on just one boss that has fallen kind of like from grace so hard it's really, like, for me, is like the next to Morgoth is one of the most tragic characters. And then and even then, like even when you're summoning Patches and he's like, do you know what, no, I'm good, and he just like nopes out of there straight away.
So
like you
good.
can he, like, you summon him and he's just like, I'm good, like you can handle this. And then in terms of like happiest, and if it's happiest when I beat them, it's Melania. Like, get her out of there. Yeah, I was like, I am free. I'm done. I think I just like sat my character down and I was like, I've got to turn off for the night because my eyes hurt. And then angriest. I think the angriest one for me was, and the one that I probably found a little more difficult than Melania was Moog. I found Moog so hard. I don't know why. I don't know what happened. I think it was partly like the bleed stuff. I was very, like, the first time I played it, I was very ill-equipped to deal with it. But yeah, Moog was the one where I was like, I need to like take a break from the game for a bit. I was like, I need a breather from this boss.
I think for me, I feel like saddest, I also agree with Radon. I feel like Radon, Melania, Morgoth are like, I'm like, I don't know if I want to, or even like Godfrey is like, I just feel kind of bad. like beating you. Happiest, I feel like the Radagon fight's very fun, I think, compared to some of the other ones. I also enjoy I like that. I like I mentioned Windmill Village. I really like the fight with the Godskid Noble in Windmill Village. I think it's very fun, even though it's really creepy. And I gotta say, Gideon Ofnir, bullying Gideon is very satisfying, because screw that guy.
Oh my god.
And I love that you can make him like worse by like taking spells that he can't use. That's so funny to me. And I think angriest is probably, I mentioned that I don't really like Renala because I feel like I should be able to beat it every time now, but I feel like I lose way too often with that fight. But I think the one that I'm angriest about is probably Fire Giant. I'm really bad at Fire Giant. So much health.
Yeah.
Camera's rough. Thematically love Fire Giant. Very interesting. Very into Fire Giant. But fighting Fire Giant's very hard for me.
Fair. Saddest for me, Melania. I mean, I think the story of Melania and Mikola is just, it's so sad. And it's clear, you walk into her room and she's there like passed out. And like, to me, my headcanon is that she was crying beforehand because Mikola got ripped out of that area and kidnapped. But yeah, I think there's so much sorrow. You can hear it in Melania's music. Happiest about, I mean, defeating Melania, because I will preface this by saying, like, I don't think that I'm particularly good at Souls games. I would like to believe that I can add a yet there, but not yet. But yeah, I was really stoked beating Melania, and then I finished Elden Ring in one sitting after that because I was so over leveled. Like, that was my whole strategy, was I was so over leveled and I had like fully maxed out equipment that I just beat the game in one sitting afterwards. So I was really happy about that because that was like the one thing I wanted to do before getting to the point of no return. And then angriest about, this is probably left field, but Bloodhound Knight Darawol. I could not, like, for the life of me. I was like, I know this is one of the only things I knew about the game going in, because I go into almost every single game knowing nothing.
Yeah.
On purpose, so I can just experience it myself before I spend many hours watching video essays. But that fight was bullshit. That's all I have to say about that. Especially, like, I'm trying to think, was that I mean, it was one of my first Souls bosses, but yeah, that fight, he's just so fast and he's got the teleportation. But like, I did use the weapon that I got there for the rest of the game. Yeah. So I think it was well worth it. And I think you can summon Blythe to help you in that fight, but I didn't know that. So I did alone. And Onion Ring was very pleased with that victory.
You can summon Blythe if you like run into him beforehand, I want to say.
Yeah.
But I will say the Everjail bosses, they're all horrible.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
Not one good boss fight in the Everjails.
That first Crucible night is a nightmare.
There's no room to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And like the Black Knife Assassin in the Everjail as well, like the head of the Black Knives. I was like,
so good. So good. I loved that fight.
Oh, did you?
I know a lot of people hated that fight. I think I got really lucky though, because I was like, oh, okay, you've got like 3 moves. And I just, again, I think Onion Ring was just way too powerful for her own good.
I just like to imagine that, like, before every battle, Onion Ring is just like, when she realizes that she's actually going to have to fight someone, she just like runs in screaming, like waving the sword.
Genuinely, 1,000%. That's genuinely, because Onion Ring has no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
She just has a large sword. But moving on, we got 2 more questions and then we're going to wrap up. Quote, from a game dev perspective, what place does FromSoft occupy in the industry? Is it realistic to strive for similar levels of depth in lore? End quote. And Sherveen, I read your answer to this because I was like, this is a really long thing. And I thought it was really thoughtful. So if you could kick us off, if that's
okay. Sure. I'll kick it off. I think there are like a lot of really cool design lessons you can learn from FromSoft games. I like looking at them like over time because I think they've been very consistent with their design ethos across a lot of different genres, a lot of different scopes, which you can't say for a lot of other really large studios. I think most other studios have pivoted in more drastically than FromSoft has. I do think Elden Ring is a AAA, like it's fully AAA game. So you can't really emulate that level of depth unless you're also a AAA studio. And I think it would take probably multiple games from a AAA studio to properly get used to approaching games that way. But I do think for smaller studios, or individual devs, there's a lot of like examples and case studies within FromSoft games and Elden Ring that's really, really great. And I love that Elden Ring exists because it's so large. It's really fun to see how they approach things like, where do they reuse assets from prior games? Where do they add detail? Where isn't there detail? And what, like, the scale means there's just so many examples for you to like look at without repetition. But I will say, if you're a smaller indie or you're making smaller games, I think some of the older FromSoft games are actually really interesting to look at because they are essentially working with a much smaller scope and budget. So like the Kingsfield games, the Shadow Tower series, they've aged a little bit more, but I think it is really interesting to look at like what works and what's already in place from the FromSoft style when you play those games. And if anyone wants to play Shadow Tower, it's a fantasy game where you eventually get a gun, and then you're just that's my pitch for Shadow Tower.
I'm here for that.
So it's Bloodborne.
But even back then, right? They're like, well, how do we get a gun in here? How do we?
Absolutely.
They're sowing the seeds. And I don't know how much I can kind of offer from a dev perspective, but I think that I think from kind of an outward kind of like point of view, I think that they're very much a studio that I think for a long time they were kind of tarred with the same brush in that you hear FromSoft and it's like, oh, I'm going to have like a difficult time with this. It was very intimidating for a long time. And it also, I feel like it kind of occupied a kind of peripheral space in that they weren't quite the AAA studios of, say, Naughty Dog or Santa Monica, for example, but they weren't quite the indie studio, like the smaller indie studios. They were somewhere kind of in between. And I think that kind of space was just perfect for them because it gave them, and it continues to give them a lot of scope to experiment with their games. You know, I think it's very telling that the year after Elden Ring, you got Armored Core 6. And it's a complete shift. It's complete, you know, they were making Armored Core games almost before anything, and like alongside, say, Kingsfield as well. And it's, I think the fact that you can say it's a From Software game and realize that it's going to be polished to high heaven, and they're now at a point where it's kind of hard to describe because I still think that they do kind of occupy that middle ground, but they're a lot more assured with it. They are, now that they've kind of like they've like proven their chops at this point. And you know, every FromSoft game is different. You know, like you say, the you've got the gothic horror aspects of Bloodborne. You've got the sort of traditional fantasy games with Dark Souls and Demon Souls, and then you know you're going completely left field with Armored Core, and then Sekiro as well, where rather than having that kind of like blank slate character that we start off with, you've got a fully realized, established character that you're playing as and you're learning the story of. So, and then even Dark Souls 2 is completely different from all the other games. And it's probably the kind of most controversial one, but it goes to show that there's this, even though you see a lot of recurring themes, there's still that room to play around and see what we can do to kind of innovate our own or their own work.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add, and I think both of you touched on this, is just the level of craftsmanship and thoughtfulness is... it takes the idea of craftsmanship, I think, really to the max. And especially, I think, in terms of narrative, because, I mean, I love plenty of series, and I won't call any out. But sometimes you play a game and you're like, this story makes no sense, and things have been retconned in a way that, like, maybe wasn't the best way to retcon things. And to studios' credit, I think it's incredibly difficult to manage that amount of lore when you have a lot of writers and a lot of narrative designers working on one thing. And I think, not to get too like business or production-y on everyone, but it's hard. Like it's genuinely hard to get everyone on the same page and making sure that like everything is super, super tight. So I think in terms of craftsmanship, again, I have only played one and a bit FromSoft games, but it's really clear to me that they deeply, deeply care about every aspect of the game. I think Elden Ring is, I think, deserves the praise that it's gotten from every aspect, from the narrative to the design to the music to the environments to like the little details. Just so good.
For
so
sure.
good.
And I think one last thing, Marina, I wanted to say is very cool. I think that level of detail that FromSoft does, I think they're also very good at getting players to slow down and actually experience it. Because when you look at a lot of Western games, I think a big challenge that a lot of Western studios have is they are putting a ton of detail and like thought into a lot of these spaces. And the design of how everything's set up forces players to kind of like run through it in like 5 seconds, which is which is a big problem that everyone is kind of like trying to figure out. And I really like FromSoft's strategies for addressing that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, FromSoft absolutely takes the saying "devil's in the details" to. I don't even want to say to an extreme. I think they take it really literally, where you're right. Like I wanted to explore the symbolism and be like, oh, well, I saw this symbol here. And what does that mean? And yeah, just I could go on and on. But our last community question, this is actually from a research paper, which is really cool.
Oh, wow.
And the question is, quote, Elden Ring holds nothing back when it comes to the idea of failure. You have to die to progress the game forward. How does that frustration propel a player to new heights by swinging the goal of beating a boss, an encounter, etc.? How is it used to propel the emotional gratification of the Souls-like genre? End quote.
No, it's a really good question. I think like that's like the fundamental thing of like the way FromSoft games and Elden Ring in general is set up. It tries to change the player's relationship with death. I think that's the main thing. Is death is often treated as failure or failure is treated as a bad thing in a lot of games, and the entire premise of every FromSoft game kind of starts with, let's come up with a reason why it's okay for the player to die or fail, right? So they're always like, oh, you're an undead, or you're unable to be, or you're in a dream with the hunter's dream, or you're tarnished, and that means you get to keep coming back and trying. So I think they're kind of starting from that point of narratively framing you with like, it's okay for you to fail, it's okay for you to die. And I think that's basically it. I think it is really trying to make sure that you are challenged, but not to the point that you bounce off and stop playing, which is a really delicate balance because it does feel good to persist and then be rewarded for that. But it is a very it's very subjective, and it's very hard to design for that. And I think that I think they're continuing to like mess around with it a lot, even now, as far along as they are with it.
And I think adding to that as well, I think having that physical thing to, even when you die, you leave behind in Elden Ring, it's your runes, obviously it's your blood echoes, your souls, whatever it is that you're kind of like leaving behind, you've always got that motivation to go back and retrieve it, because you know, you might have died by the stupidest little thing. You know, you might just be like on low health, you've run out of healing, and then like a goat rolls into you, and it's like, damn, I've just lost 20,000 souls. That's a level that I could have made myself stronger with. But you've got that reason to go dive back into the world and retrieve it, because otherwise, if you die again, you're going to lose it. So you've kind of got that motivation to, okay, I need to get this part of me that's back, that's going to help me inherently learn the game more, get stronger in the game, so that I can take on these harder challenges. And when you know, there comes a point where you start worrying about that so much, because you do become a lot more powerful. But that's kind of like the moment where it's like, oh, okay, I think when you are getting to that point, that's when you can say, I'm really starting to master this game. You know, by the time you get to, or maybe it's because you get frustrated with it, because after a while I stopped caring about my rooms when I kept dying to Melania, and I was like, you know what, I'm good. They can go. I'll get some more later. It's fine. But I think in those early stages where they are so important, I think that really helps the emotional weight of wanting to go back over and over to get better at these areas, so that you can keep hold of what you've worked so hard in the run up to it, and use it later on to get stronger.
I have nothing to add to that. Both of you said that so beautifully. But maybe I'll just reiterate. I do think that the difficulty is done again with so much craftsmanship, where it is possible to beat the game being level 1, and people do that, and they upload videos of that on YouTube, and I look at that and I'm like, how? I think that it's very, very thoughtfully designed, and for me, taught me patience and perseverance, and I'm hooked. Absolutely hooked. So big thank you to everyone that submitted a question. I think this was super fun. Would love to continue doing it. And to wrap us up, I would love to ask, what are your final thoughts on Elden Ring? Super open-ended. You can talk about anything that you'd like.
Anything.
Yeah, anything.
I think it's, I think what a really great thing about it is there's so many like things we didn't talk about. Like,
Yep.
like I didn't get to talk about Fia or like, or the pros or Raya. I will say like lots of really fun characters. Just there. But I think, as a final thought that I think is really fun, I don't know how many people know how commonly known this is, but a thing I really love is this anecdote about like the original inspirations for Miyazaki making the Souls games. And it was about this time where he got like stuck in the mud in his car with a bunch of people, and they all had to like kind of get out and push each other like to the top of this hill and then let everyone go. And it was this really fun moment of like everyone kind of coming together and people you didn't really know and would probably never see again. And so I think that the thing that I consider the most like definitive thing of Souls games and Elden Ring and things like that we didn't talk about too much isn't necessarily the difficulty. I think it's actually the messaging system. And there's just the little messages everyone leaves for each other. Because I think a lot of the storytelling and everything being very obtuse and the difficulty and a lot of those things are actually done to encourage players to kind of band together a bit and share knowledge and kind of like talk about it and to create the sense of like interacting with people that you won't necessarily see ever again, which is this really interesting melancholy vibe that I really like.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, initially I was going to talk about kind of like the comedy that's underlying in it, like you say, Pope Turtle. Yeah, that's so funny. That you've got like the prawn merchant, you've got Gold Mask, you've got Pope Turtle, you've got Leonard the horse that Radahn is so eager to keep that he learns gravity magic so he can like float slightly above him. It's just incredible. But I think that the messaging part of it and the player interaction within those games is so special because it really feels like, I think you get a lot of people like Kojima where he's trying to revolutionize this kind of like strand system where it's a community of players that are working together for one common goal, but kind of also almost asymmetrically, and they're more of an omniscient presence than anything, but they're all contributing toward the same goal. But I think that the Souls games, having those the messages that kind of they could either help or hinder you, liar ahead, you might have someone that's like fate wall ahead, and then you'll see a message behind it that's like liar ahead, so you're wondering which one is true. But also you've got the little puddles where you've seen where people have died and you're thinking, how have they died? And then there's the rating system where if a message is good, you can rate it and they'll get like the players will get a little health boost, which has helped me out many a time in all these bosses. Yeah, exactly. And it's a real sense of, even though you're going on this journey alone in your game, there is still very much a sense of community and a sense of just helpfulness, really. And I think that's what keeps these sorts of games thriving, in that they're still very much a game that you want to, stand by the water cooler and talk about. Where did you get to? What can I help you out with? I was saying about my friend dropping me items when I wanted to do a fresh playthrough. It's a great way. It's a fantastic bonding experience. Absolutely.
Oh, I love that.
And sometimes you need flowers.
You absolutely do. And that was going to be my note to take us in a different direction, is I love the symbolism of flowers still blooming on the battlefield, on the many battlefields in the lands between. And to me, that symbolizes hope of like, keep going. There's better on the horizon. When you've died 30 times to millennia, you get ready to die another 30. But yeah, I think that that's really beautiful symbolism in a game where, as you walk through certain environments, you feel like there is no hope or that things are blighted and destroyed. So I love that flowers still bloom on the battlefield. But Jack, Sherveen, thank you both so much. This was so fun. I can't believe that it's been almost 2 hours.
Oh my God.
Thanks for having us.
I mean, this will be the longest episode for sure.
It had to be, didn't it?
It's the longest anyone's let me talk about Elden Ring, so I appreciate that.
But it's so good. It's so good. And thank you both so much for your time and your thoughtfulness and coming with so many brilliant ideas and ways of thinking about this game that I hadn't thought about before. So thank you. And thank you to you, our listeners, for being here and for listening. So if you have any feedback, please send it our way. Our socials will be in the description if you'd like to follow us. If you aren't currently subscribed or following, please do so that you don't miss a future episode. Thank you again for being here, and we'll see you next time. Bye.